Hello everyone and welcome to today's lecture. Today's going to be a short lecture, and before we start I wanted to thank Richie for making a majority of these slides. Thank you, Richie. I'm Kevin and I'll be giving this lecture. Alright, so quick overview. What we're going to be talking about is what game feel is, some input and expectations and how that is attributing to game feel, how visuals can attribute to game feel, and some ways to implement game feel in your games. So game feel is a bit of an abstract topic, and game feel can mean basically the energy that your game gives off to us. It's the thing that breaks the boundary between our world and the game world. It's what makes the player feel like they are in the game rather than just playing a game. A lot of times people call game feel immersion. It makes you feel as if you're in the game, makes you lose track of time. Now, there are a lot of ways to introduce game feel and to make game feel better. And that would be through sound, visuals, gameplay, input, which we'll be talking about later, and a slew of other things like colors and story sometimes even. Now, the thing about game feel is we normally want to match the response expected from a person to what the game actually does, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. And this is going to account for things for like human error, favorable realism, and what would make the game work and play better as. You don't want a player to jump and be in the air for 50 seconds, right? Unless there's a reason for it. Because if I were to jump in Mario right from the start, I wouldn't expect Mario to take 50 seconds to reach the floor. That's like a third of the counter, right? Now, when we think about game feel, we also normally want to think of adjectives: sliding, sticking, floating, crackling. As mentioned with the previous example, we don't want Mario to float. Input and expectation. This is basically the difference between what a player thinks should happen and what actually happens, right? If I press a dash button, I expect my player to go forward immediately, not 2 seconds after. Or again, when I press the button for Mario to jump, I expect him to just jump quickly, not for 50 seconds. This can often, if not implemented well, this can be confusing or frustrating for a player and can make them feel like they're no longer in the game. Because things that we expected to happen didn't. That's the simplest way to explain it, and I'm sure a lot of you will understand what I mean from playing games yourselves. You hate it when you press a button and the response isn't what you expect, or it happens 2 seconds after, or it's just not timed just the right way. Basically, we don't want to put things in a game that make the player frustrated, mad, or, as the slide says, tilted. Favorable realism. We talked about this a little bit earlier on, and basically, this is matching the player's expectation to what actually happens on screen. A clear version of this is coyote time. You see this in Celeste, where a couple seconds after, or a couple moments after Celeste has fallen or stepped off the edge, they stay the same height and can jump right after as if it was their first jump. This is done on purpose so that players get a little bit of extra space when jumping from a ledge and don't have to get mad that, hey, I made that ledge perfectly. Because a lot of times our eyes can't really keep up with what's actually happening. Now, air jumping is only one version of favorable realism, and obviously we can't jump in the air. But there are a lot of other things that you could do with favorable realism to help a player. A lot of times people will do things in games that don't make sense. Some might say like aim assist. That doesn't really make sense, right? You don't normally have someone or something, some unknown entity, assisting you in aiming. You're sure you aimed at the foot, but it helps move you a little bit closer to the head or the chest. That's basically another way of implementing favorable realism. Now this is a big one. This is the one that we all are most familiar with. Visual effects. Visual effects are a huge part in game feel, right? In this example here, we see that the hunter from Monster Hunter World has a flaming blade, and you can see sparks come off it as he attacks the monster. We expect this, right? Because if we were to attack a monster with a flaming hot blade, we don't expect nothing to happen. We want to see the impact, see the damage, and you can even see the screen shaking from how much damage we're doing. This immerses the player like, wow, I'm actually dealing damage. I'm doing something. And, there's a lot of ways to use visual effects, which can include particle effects, screen shake, and bullet casings and some other stuff, right? Now, typically people use particle effects or screen shake, but you can do a lot of visual effects for even really small things that immerse the player. Now, this can change with the game feel for first person. When you're playing a first person game, you want to feel as if you are the character, right? So when we're playing as Lucio, for example, in Overwatch, he glides and his attacks are more fluid, I would say, as if he's on skates, because he is. Then for Reinhardt, when we attack as him or walk as him, you can feel the weight of his armor and his strength in every single swing because of just how strong he is and how big he is. This is what we expect, right? He's a big guy, a strong guy with a hammer. He's gonna wreck some stuff. And last but not least, we have Zenyatta. Zenyatta floats and meditates. And we see this in gameplay through how slowly and floaty he feels. Here, we actually see some visuals. On the bottom left is Lucio, who seems like he's skating and sliding. On the top, we see Reinhardt with his heavy attacks and the way that he moves. And then on the bottom right, near the end, we actually see Zenyatta killing someone, and the way that he just floats around, even these last moments of his attack, and how he's slow. Now, we're going to quickly talk about implementation. And this is just some very small basic stuff of implementation. Basically, in our Unity system, or Unity that we've taught you, there are particle systems, and you could do, these are some things you could toy around with: spread, opacity, duration, image, and speed. Spread is basically how wide or what arc you want the particles to go at. Opacity, that's just how visible these particles are. You want different opacities for different things. For example, dust particles might not have the same opacity as sparks from a sword, water particles, and you could do these comparisons with everything. Not all fire particles would last the same amount of time, or dust particles would last the same amount of time, right? The image for each of these things would also be different. A speck of dust doesn't look the same as an ember, or a droplet of water. And speed can vary depending on impact, with water, for example, running on the ground, and just the intensity of explosions. These things can change, right? And the second thing that you can mess around with is screen shake. You can start off with putting in some random values every single time something happens for a certain duration of time, and it can really show the player the impact of what they're doing. And these are just some quick things. I'm sure you could think of other things, and I really look forward to seeing that in games, or even just knowing that you could implement these things. And I look forward to seeing you implement these things also in your game, so that I can feel like I'm in it. Now, here are just some quick resources. Other than that, this is the end of the lecture, but here are some resources for you to research more about game feel and some things that you could use to help you with game feel and study about game feel and how to put better game feel in your games. I said game feel a lot, but that should be the last time I say it. So, good luck with everything, and see you next time.